They thought I was too weak to fight back until I showed them who signed the deed. Holly Alvarez shuffled through the chipped doors of the Harborville Community Hall, the familiar musty scent wrapping around her like an old, worn blanket. Her canvas bag, frayed at the corners, bounced lightly against her hip as she moved toward the back corner by the window. Her sea-green cardigan faded to a soft pastel, sleeves pushed up past her wrists. She'd worked maintenance at the local library for years, the kind of invisible presence most overlooked, quiet, dependable, not the kind anyone expected to raise a voice in neighborhood politics. Today was different, though. The room buzzed with clusters of neighbors, some arguing, others whispering, but the atmosphere was thick with tension about the news that some developer might take over the block. Holly caught fragments of phrases: inevitable, can't stop it, big money, as she settled onto a hard metal folding chair, its coolness seeping through her thin cardigan. Someone near the front joked, "Only property owners get a vote. Sorry, Holly, that's how it always is." Her stomach twisted into a dull knot when Marcia Kane, the sharp-tongued president of the HOA, with her perfectly coiffed hair and crisp navy blazer, cut across the room. "Only property owners have a say, dear," Marcia said pointedly, eyes glinting with finality as several heads turned to watch Holly. Her cheeks burned, and she lowered her gaze. The murmurs didn't fade when she tried to find her voice. Instead, they seemed louder, swirling into an invisible wall. Holly's fingers tightened around the small ring of keys on her bag strap, each key marked with a tiny blue sticker, a small habit she'd developed for her own order amid clutter. That little detail, insignificant to others, felt like a secret lifeline. The meeting dragged on, voices rising over a droning projector. Holly's silence felt heavier than the dusty air in the room. Just minutes before, she had rehearsed a question about the developer's plans, what would happen to the longtime residents. But now, that question would go unasked, swallowed by the crowd. She traced her thumb over the worn edges of one sticker on a key, the faint press of embossed numbers beneath her touch. The idea that she wasn't seen, really seen, weighed on her. The window beside her rattled softly with the breeze as a nearby fan whirred, adding a mechanical hum to the low conversations. Around her, neighbors leaned forward, whispers picking up again about losses, future rent hikes, no choice. Holly's pulse quickened, not out of hope, but dread. Something wasn't right, and while the room was full, the voices that mattered weren't hers. As Marcia wrapped the meeting with announcements about next month's final vote, Holly stayed seated, clutching those keys more tightly. They jingled faintly, a fragile sound in the thick quiet. She wondered if anyone even remembered that those little symbols meant something: ownership, history, roots. For now, she was just a shadow in the back, fading beneath the weight of the takeover talk. But that small, sharp detail, the blue stickers on her keys, remained with her, a seed planted in the soil of a fight that she hadn't yet begun to understand. The room buzzed with chatter, the sharp clink of ceramic mugs mingling with murmuring voices as the meeting took a short recess. Holly stood near the coffee urn, hands wrapped around a warm cup, hoping to steer a slice of attention her way. But before she could say a word, Greg, Marcia Kane's eager deputy, sidled up, an amused smirk tugging at his lips. "So, Holly, here to refill the coffee, or maybe clean up the mess we all leave?" His voice carried a light tease, but the sting was unmistakable. Several residents glanced away, uncomfortable but silent, as if they had rehearsed this awkward dance a dozen times. Holly forced a smile, swallowing the lump in her throat. She loved this neighborhood. Her grandmother had raised her here. But right now, it felt like an invisible barrier hummed between her and everyone else. Marcia's voice floated over from the far corner as she passed by, giving a half-apologetic shrug and eyes flicking toward a glossy brochure resting on the table. The new Harborville Lofts. Her tone was clipped and urgent. "Developers are expected in Friday to finalize offers. This isn't something we can afford to delay." The words carried a weight that sank into Holly's chest, each syllable ticking toward an inevitable deadline. The thought of losing even a piece of this place tightened every muscle, knitting her brows together. Holly took a deliberate breath, feeling the bittersweet aroma of the maple bar Mr. Donner had slipped into her hand moments earlier. The elderly neighbor's eyes twinkled when he leaned in, voice low. "They underestimate people here. But records don't lie, kid. Hold tight to that truth." The kindness broke through the tension like sunlight slipping through knots in winter branches. She nodded, clutching the bar like a talisman, while the murmur around her swelled again. The whole community was on edge, poised between giving in and fighting back, and Holly felt the weight of those blue stickers on her keys. That little secret only she knew. That they symbolized more than just locks. They symbolized rights. The coffee dripped steadily into the urn, each plink echoing in the charged silence. As neighbors gathered around Marcia and Greg, debating timelines and practicalities, Holly's fingers tightened around the bar's wax paper. Friday was fast approaching, the moment when everything would be decided. Yet beneath the surface, something stirred, a quiet sense that she wasn't as alone as it felt, and that maybe there was a crack in the polished facade of this meeting room where truth could slip through. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. The days stretched long and uneven, marked by the steady clang of typewriter keys at the library, the murmur of neighborhood chatter, and Holly's growing unease. Determined to make her voice heard, she dropped neatly folded notes into the association's suggestion box, her handwriting steady despite trembling fingers. Each note pleaded for clarity, for a chance to speak up, to protect the place she called home. But when the meeting minutes were posted, her name was absent. No acknowledgement, no invitation. She emailed Marcia Kane directly, outlining her concerns with careful calm. The reply was cold and brief. "Only deed holders are eligible to speak at meetings. Thank you for understanding." Another blow. But Holly took a breath, refusing to fold. Late one Thursday night, seated at her cluttered kitchen table with a dim lamp casting soft circles of light, Holly hunted for something, a foothold. Her notes, printed and scattered, felt fragile in her hands. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the distant hum of a late-night car passing by. She stared at the torn envelope that had slipped out of her canvas bag earlier, the official certified letter she'd received from the title company weeks ago. Her name, clear and undebatable, marked her as owner of her grandmother's house. That letter was a lifeline, an anchor she hadn't fully realized she had been clutching all along. Her eyes traced the official seal and the neat imprint of the title company's logo, the paper marking every legal turn of ownership. The proof was undeniable. Holly's breath hitched just slightly, not because the fight was over, but because the rules could no longer ignore her. This was the glimmer she needed in a sea of doubt. Still, exhaustion crept in. She fingered the edges of her torn speaking notes again, tempted to toss them in the trash. What if they just won't listen? She whispered to herself. The weight of being overlooked wasn't new, but this moment felt heavier, a nearly silent question hanging between hope and surrender. Yet that night, the smell of fresh coffee cooling nearby and the soft glow from the lamp grounded her. Memory came in small moments, the sharp ink of her name on official paper, the memory of neighbors like Mr. Donner quietly suggesting she hold on to the truth. The next morning, she folded her notes carefully, slipped the certified letter back into her bag, and whispered a quiet promise that she wasn't done yet. "Tomorrow," she said, voice low but certain, "I'll try again." The air in the conference room was thick with anticipation and the faint chemical tang of fresh carpet adhesive. A smell Holly had come to associate with change, and not the kind she welcomed. Voices rose and fell in waves as neighbors clustered in tight groups, their faces tense, some animated, most guarded. The polished surface of the long folding tables gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, but the warmth in the room was fading fast. Holly sat tucked in the corner near the bulletin board, hoping this time someone would hear her. Instead, her voice barely cut through the din when she spoke up. I just want to understand how this will affect all of us, especially families who've lived here for generations. The room barely acknowledged her. The dismissive hum of murmurs swallowed her words like a gust of wind snuffles out a candle. Steve, the developer's confident spokesman, stepped forward. His voice smooth and practiced. We appreciate the concern, but decisions in this room are for the real homeowners. His eyes swept the space, knowingly ignoring Holly's hesitant stance. Partial owners or non-primary residents don't count here. Holly's fingers tightened subconsciously around the worn fabric of her cardigan. Her breath hitched, sharp and uneven, as a flush spread from her cheeks down to her neck. She felt small, dismissed again under the weight of a word she'd heard all too often. Not enough. Tearing her gaze from the crowd, she stood to leave, her heart sinking, the edges of vision already thinning with near-quiet tears. On her way out, a flicker of blue caught her eye, a packet of association rules pinned neatly on the bulletin board at the back of the room. She stopped, the scent of fresh paper mingling with the faint plastic smell of the binding. The words Section 7.3 were underlined in faded blue ink, matching the tiny blue stickers she always placed on her house keys, a ritual of order she maintained since her grandmother passed. She leaned in, eyes scanning the typed text that read, "All deed holders, regardless of residency duration, are entitled to voting rights in community decisions." It was a quiet declaration, tucked away in legalese, easily overlooked but powerful, and it shocked her to see that this vital rule had been ignored. The buzz of voices seemed to fade for a beat, as Holly stood still, the underlined clause burning a hole through the haze of defeat. The room's cold atmosphere contrasted with the sudden warmth of possibility blooming low in her chest. She realized this document was more than words on paper. It was a lifeline tethered to the truth. The blue sticker on her keys wasn't just a habit. It symbolized her rightful ownership. That small, unassuming detail was her anchor in the storm swirling around her. Holly wiped a tear quickly before turning back toward the door, her resolve hardening despite the weight in her limbs. This clause was the clue she needed, her chance to shift the tide. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Holly's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the scattered papers from the floor, her speaking notes, photocopies of emails, and most importantly, the crisp official deed that bore her name in neat embossed letters. The room around her swirled with voices, the hum of conversation growing louder as the members prepared to move forward with the meeting's agenda. She stuffed everything carefully into her worn canvas bag, feeling the reassuring weight of the deed against her side. A quick text to Mr. Donner, the kindly elderly neighbor who had quietly supported her all week, brought an immediate reply. "Meet you at the table. Stay strong." Encouraged, she walked toward the center of the room, the gaze of several residents flickering her way, some curious, others wary. Marcia Kane, polished and poised in her navy blazer, caught sight of Holly and straightened, a flicker of impatience crossing her expression as she whispered something to Greg, her deputy, who gave a curt nod. Holly took a steadying breath. Section 7.3 of the Association Rules clearly states that all deed holders have a voice and vote in decisions, regardless of how long they've lived in the community, she began, holding up a printed copy with the clause underlined in a soft blue, the same shade as the little stickers on her keys. Marcia's eyes snapped toward the paper, her lips tightening. "That clause hasn't been enforced strictly before," she said slowly, carefully choosing words that hinted at past oversight rather than outright denial. "But it's true that a vote requires proper authorization," she added, glancing at others in the room. The developer's representative, a clean-cut man named Steve, shifted uneasily, sensing a new dynamic unfolding. The risk was rising. If Holly's claim was accepted, the upcoming vote on the sale could be invalidated or at least delayed. But if ignored, the association risked a legal contest that could reflect poorly on their leadership. Mr. Donner stepped forward beside Holly, his voice calm but firm. "We've all lived here through changes and challenges," he said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Ignoring rightful owners won't protect this neighborhood. The law is clear. If she owns that deed, she deserves the respect and the vote." Whispers rippled through the room as a few neighbors shifted toward Holly, emboldened by the mounting clarity. The authority of tangible documents, deed, printed rules, legal clarity, formed a protective shield around her, one that couldn't be dismissed by polite nods or veiled skepticism. As Marcia opened a folder and flipped through more association papers, the room hushed, the tension palpable. A deadline loomed. The developer's offer was due by the end of the day, and a vote was scheduled immediately. It was now or never. Holly's heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. This was the moment to show them that she wasn't invisible, that her voice and her rights mattered. The room held its breath. Holly took a slow, deep breath and stepped forward, the room suddenly falling into a hush as all eyes unexpectedly shifted toward her. Her fingers gripped the edges of the deed and the laminated copy of Section 7.3, both slightly crinkled from the nervous handling. She slid them carefully onto the polished conference table, the soft thud magnified in the heavy silence. "According to this," she said, voice clear but not loud, steady and unwavering as she locked eyes with Marcia and Greg, "I do get a vote." The weight of those words filled the room like an unseen tide. Mr. Donner, standing just behind her, nodded quietly in support, his steady presence a silent pillar of authority. The air grew tense, charged with an unfamiliar mixture of surprise and uncertainty. Marcia's usual confident posture faltered. She blinked rapidly, the practiced mask slipping for a fraction as she hesitated, fingers drumming nervously on the table's edge. Greg glanced at Marcia, then back to Holly, his earlier smugness replaced by wariness. The developer's representative leaned in, interest suddenly piqued, eyebrows slightly raised as he assessed the new dynamic unfolding before him. A few neighbors cleared their throats and murmured, the previously indifferent crowd stirring. It was clear that Holly's move had cracked the illusion that she was invisible, powerless. Whispers of support fluttered through the room, emboldened by the undeniable legality of her claim. "Let's not forget," Mr. Donner's gravelly voice carried across the space. "This community is held together by shared ownership and respect. Ignoring rightful voices only weakens it." The atmosphere shifted palpably as others reviewed the documents Holly laid bare. The polished veneer of the meeting room lost some of its cold rigidity, replaced by a hesitant openness as the association leaders grappled with the implications. Marcia finally spoke, voice quieter than before. "Well, the clause is there. It's clear that rightful owners must be included." Her eyes met Holly's, and for the first time, a flicker of respect shone through the usual veneer of dismissal. I hadn't realized the weight of this." Holly's heart pounded as the room absorbed the moment. The deadline for the developer's offer loomed large. Yet now the vote's outcome rested not on whispered politics or social standing, but on facts laid bare. The future of Harborville was no longer a foregone conclusion. In that quiet, charged pause, Holly saw an opening, a chance to reclaim not just her voice, but the voice of every overlooked resident. "If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward." When the votes were called, the room fell into an expectant silence, every eye on Holly Alvarez as she reached out to place her ballot on the table. The weight of weeks pressed on her shoulders, but her hand was steady. The familiar blue sticker gleamed in the soft light, a quiet emblem that had stood for more than just keys. It stood for truth, history, and rightful belonging. The ballots were counted methodically. Greg shifted uneasily while Marcia's usually impeccable composure wavered. The developer's representative watched with narrowed eyes, lips pressed tight as the tally neared its conclusion. Then came the verdict. The sale was blocked. the narrow margin tipped by Holly's vote. Murmurs spread like a gentle wave, shock, relief, and cautious hope blending in the air. The developer's representative, who had once been so sure, finally nodded and stepped back, conceding for now. "We'll return with a proposal that respects the community," he said, voice low but sincere. Greg approached Holly quietly. "That wasn't your place to speak up before," he admitted, a trace of humility softening his tone. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Marcia, eyes no longer sharp but sincere, met Holly's gaze directly. "I didn't see you, not really. You have my respect now," she said, an invitation in her words. "Next month, you'll have 5 minutes on the agenda." The formal minutes reflected the change. The recording secretary carefully noted Holly's ownership status and her vote against the sale. It was more than ink on paper. It was official recognition that could not be ignored. Neighbors shifted closer, some offering nods, others tentative smiles, a community recalibrating. Holly felt their eyes not as judgment but as acknowledgement. She was no longer invisible. Later, as she packed her belongings, the faint sound of applause filled the room, sincere and cautious. This wasn't just a victory against an outside force. It was a reclamation of voice, presence, and dignity. The meeting ended, but Holly's journey into the heart of Harborville's future had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, a subtle but unmistakable shift settled over Harborville. At every neighborhood meeting, Holly's presence was no longer a quiet shadow along the edges, but a recognized part of the community's fabric. Conversations opened with a nod, questions acknowledged with a smile. Neighbors who once glanced away filled the seats beside her, listening as she spoke, not just about the upcoming vote, but about the history and heart of the block they all called home. One evening, after a particularly lively meeting where Holly was invited to weigh in on revitalization plans, she stepped through the front door of her house. The soft amber light from the porch lamp spilled onto her worn canvas bag as she hung her keys carefully on the wall hook by the door. The small blue stickers gleamed faintly, catching the light like badges quietly earned. She traced a finger along the stickers, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Those tiny markers, once just a way to keep her keys organized, had come to represent something grander: resilience, acknowledgement, and courage. They had helped her claim a voice that was rightfully hers, one that no longer needed to be quieted or overlooked. Holly reflected on the journey, the moments of doubt, the dismissals, the whispered underestimations that tried to keep her invisible, yet it was her quiet perseverance that had shifted the course. She learned that strength wasn't about raising your voice the loudest in the room, but about standing firm, even when it feels like no one is watching. Outside, the street hummed softly with the evening breeze. Holly opened a window to let in the brisk, salty air that carried the distant sounds of waves against the harbor. The house felt alive, a sanctuary in the midst of change. Her eyes lifted to the calendar on the kitchen wall, already marked for next month's meeting, this time with her name on the agenda. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was hers to shape, and now she was ready. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.